Welcome, dear friends, to a tale of love, betrayal, and redemption. Enjoy the story. The sterile walls of St. Mary's Hospital seemed to close in on Debbie Wilson as she stared at the tiny bundle in her arms. Tears streamed down her face, leaving mascara trails on her pale cheeks. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Instead, it felt like her world was crumbling around her. "Mrs. Wilson," Dr. Thompson said gently, his weathered face creased with concern. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I need to make sure you understand your son's condition." Debbie nodded numbly, her eyes never leaving the wrinkled face of her newborn son. He looked so perfect, so innocent. How could this be happening? "Samuel has a rare genetic disorder called Treacher-Collins syndrome," the doctor continued. "It affects the development of bones and tissues in the face. He may face challenges with breathing, eating, and hearing as he grows." "But he'll be okay, right?" Debbie's voice cracked as she spoke. "He'll live a normal life?" Dr. Thompson's hesitation spoke volumes. "With proper care and support, many individuals with Treacher-Collins lead fulfilling lives. But I won't sugarcoat it, Mrs. Wilson. The road ahead will be challenging." As the doctor's words washed over her, Debbie's mind raced back to that rainy day 3 years ago, when her life had changed forever. The rain pelted down mercilessly as Debbie huddled under the flimsy bus stop shelter. Her second-hand coat was soaked through, and her dyed blonde hair clung to her face in wet tendrils. She checked her watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. The bus was late again. "Need a ride?" a deep voice called out. Debbie looked up to see a beaten-up Ford pickup idling at the curb. The driver, a ruggedly handsome man with kind eyes, leaned out the window. "Oh, no thanks," Debbie stammered. "I'm just waiting for the bus." The man chuckled. "Honey, that bus ain't coming. Tree fell across the road about a mile back. Why don't you hop in? I can at least give you a dry place to wait until help comes." Against her better judgment, Debbie found herself climbing into the passenger seat of the stranger's truck. As she settled in, she caught a whiff of pine and motor oil, an oddly comforting combination. "I'm Mike," the man said, offering his hand. "Mike Johnson." "Debbie Wilson," she replied, shaking his hand. "Thanks for this. I was starting to think I might grow gills out there." Mike laughed, a warm, rich sound that made Debbie's heart skip a beat. "Well, we can't have that. Pretty girl like you turning into a fish? That'd be a real shame." As they sat in the broken-down truck, waiting for a tow, Debbie found herself opening up to Mike in a way she never had with anyone before. She told him about her dreams of becoming a nurse, her struggles to make ends meet while putting herself through community college, and her determination to build a better life than the one she'd left behind in her small, gossipy hometown. Mike listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. When Debbie finally ran out of words, he reached out and tucked a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "You're something else, Debbie Wilson," he said softly. "I've got a feeling you're going to change my life." Little did either of them know just how prophetic those words would turn out to be. 6 months after that fateful rainy day, Debbie found herself standing on the porch of an imposing Victorian house, her palms sweating as Mike rang the doorbell. "Relax," Mike whispered, squeezing her hand. "My mom's gonna love you." But as the door swung open to reveal a stern-faced woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and piercing blue eyes, Debbie's hopes for a warm welcome evaporated. "Michael," the woman said, her voice as cold as a Midwest winter. "You're late." "Sorry, Mom," Mike replied, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Traffic was a nightmare. Mom, this is Debbie. Debbie, meet my mother, Rachel Johnson." Debbie extended her hand, summoning her most winning smile. "It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Johnson. Mike's told me so much about you." Rachel's eyes raked over Debbie, taking in her modest sundress and scuffed pumps. Her lips pursed as if she'd tasted something sour. "Charmed, I'm sure," she said, ignoring Debbie's outstretched hand. "Well, don't just stand there. Come in before the neighbors start to talk." As they followed Rachel into a living room that looked like it belonged in a museum, Debbie's heart sank. This was not going to be the meet-the-parents experience she'd hoped for. The next hour was an exercise in thinly veiled insults and passive-aggressive jabs. Rachel questioned everything from Debbie's family background. Oh, your father was a mechanic? How quaint! To her career aspirations. A nurse? Well, I suppose someone has to do it. By the time they left, Debbie was fighting back tears. In the car, Mike pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. I'm so sorry, Deb, he murmured. Mom's just set in her ways. She'll come around, I promise. But as they drove away from the grand house on Maple Street, Debbie couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel Johnson was going to be a formidable obstacle in her pursuit of happily ever after. Despite Rachel's disapproval, Mike and Debbie's relationship blossomed. They moved in together, got engaged, and finally tied the knot in a small ceremony at the local courthouse. Rachel's absence was conspicuous, but Debbie was determined not to let it dampen her joy. As the months passed, Debbie threw herself into building a life with Mike. She finished her nursing degree, landing a job at the local hospital. Mike's construction business took off, allowing them to buy a modest but comfortable home in a nice neighborhood. When Debbie discovered she was pregnant, it felt like the final piece of their perfect life falling into place. Mike was ecstatic, twirling her around their kitchen as they laughed and cried tears of joy. But Rachel's shadow loomed large over their happiness. At every family gathering, she found ways to criticize Debbie's choices. From her decision to keep working during the pregnancy to the common name they'd chosen for the baby. Samuel? Rachel had scoffed when they announced it at Thanksgiving dinner. Why not something with a bit more class? After all, he'll be carrying on the Johnson family name. Debbie had gritted her teeth and smiled, reminding herself that in just a few short months she'd be holding her beautiful baby boy. Nothing else mattered. Now, as she cradled that same baby boy in her arms, his future suddenly uncertain, Debbie felt a wave of guilt wash over her. Had she done something wrong? Was this somehow her fault? Mrs. Wilson? Dr. Thompson's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Is there someone we can call for you? Your husband, perhaps? Debbie nodded, fumbling for her phone with shaking hands. As she dialed Mike's number, she sent up a silent prayer. Please, let him understand. Let him be strong enough for both of us. Mike Johnson was elbow-deep in drywall dust when his phone rang. Wiping his hands on his jeans, he fished the device from his pocket, grinning when he saw Debbie's name on the screen. Hey, beautiful, he answered cheerfully. How's our little slugger doing? Keeping you up all night already? The silence on the other end of the line made his smile falter. Deb? You there? Mike, Debbie's voice was barely above a whisper. Something's wrong with Sam. As Debbie explained their son's condition, her words punctuated by quiet sobs, Mike felt the world tilt on its axis. This couldn't be happening. Not to them. Not to his son. I gotta go, he mumbled, hanging up before Debbie could respond. In a daze, Mike climbed into his truck and started driving. He had no destination in mind. He just knew he couldn't go to the hospital, couldn't face the reality of what Debbie had told him. Before he realized where he was going, Mike found himself pulling into his mother's driveway. Rachel opened the door before he could even knock, one look at his face telling her all she needed to know. Oh, Michael, she said, pulling him into a hug. What's happened? As Mike poured out the story, Rachel's face hardened. When he finished, she took his hands in hers, her voice low and urgent. Michael, darling, I hate to even suggest this, but are you sure the baby is yours? Mike recoiled as if he'd been slapped. What? Mom, how can you even ask that? Rachel's eyes were full of sympathetic concern, but there was a glint of something else, something calculating. I'm just saying, sweetheart, these things happen. And Debbie, well, she's not exactly from our world, is she? Who knows what she might be capable of? As Rachel's poisonous words seeped into Mike's already confused and frightened mind, a seed of doubt took root. Could it be true? Could Debbie have betrayed him like this? Rachel Johnson strode through the hospital corridors like a woman on a mission. Her Gucci heels clicked against the linoleum, turning heads as she passed. She paused outside room 305, smoothing her designer suit before pushing open the door. Debbie looked up from the bassinet where baby Sam lay sleeping, her face lighting up with hope. Mrs. Johnson, I'm so glad you're here. Is Mike with you? Rachel's lip curled in distaste as she took in Debbie's disheveled appearance. No, dear, Michael is processing the news. I thought it best if I came alone. Debbie's face fell, but she rallied quickly. Would you like to meet your grandson? He's sleeping now, but that won't be necessary, Rachel cut her off. In fact, I think it's best if we keep this conversation between us. Nurse, she called to a passing staff member, would you mind watching the baby for a moment? Mrs. Wilson and I need to speak privately. Once they were alone, Rachel's demeanor changed completely. Gone was the facade of concern, replaced by cold fury. Listen carefully, you little gold digger, she hissed. I know what you've done, and it stops now. You're going to take that child and leave town, tonight. There's a house on the outskirts of Millbrook, 1242 Sycamore Lane. Go there. Everything you need will be provided. Debbie's eyes widened in shock. Mrs. Johnson, I don't understand. I can't just leave. Mike wants nothing to do with you or that baby, Rachel snapped. Face it, dear. Your little plan to trap my son has failed. Now you have two choices. Leave quietly with your offspring, or I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about your sordid past. I'm sure the hospital board would be very interested to learn about the real reason you left your last job. Debbie's face paled. How did you... I have my ways, dear. Now what's it going to be? A fresh start with your son or complete ruination? Tears streaming down her face, Debbie nodded in defeat. Okay, she whispered. I'll go. Rachel's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Wise choice. Oh, and Debbie, don't even think about contacting Michael. If you do, all bets are off. As Rachel sauntered out of the room, Debbie collapsed into the chair by Sam's bassinet. How had everything gone so wrong, and what was she going to do now? The house at 1242 Sycamore Lane was a far cry from the cozy home Debbie had shared with Mike. Paint peeled from the weathered siding, and the porch sagged ominously. As Debbie approached, clutching Sam to her chest, she wondered if this was all some cruel joke. The front door creaked open before she could knock, revealing a disheveled man in his late 30s. His bloodshot eyes and the strong smell of whiskey made Debbie take an instinctive step back. You must be Debbie, the man slurred. Aunt Rachel said you'd be coming. I'm Oliver. Welcome to Casa de Crap. Debbie's heart sank. This was to be her new home? With a drunk stranger and a newborn with special needs? I think there's been a mistake, she stammered. Maybe I should go. Oliver's eyes softened as they landed on Sam. Hey, now don't be hasty. Come on in. Let's get the little guy out of the cold. Against her better judgment, Debbie followed Oliver into the house. The interior was as run down as the outside, but it was mercifully clean. Oliver led her to a small bedroom where a crib and changing table had been set up. Aunt Rachel had some of this stuff delivered yesterday, he explained. Said it was for a charity case. Debbie bristled at the term, but her exhaustion outweighed her pride. She laid Sam gently in the crib, marveling at how peaceful he looked, despite the chaos of the past 24 hours. When she returned to the living room, she found Oliver nursing a cup of coffee, looking markedly more sober. All right, he said, gesturing for her to sit. Why don't you tell me what the hell is going on? Because I gotta say, getting a call from my estranged aunt telling me to house a strange woman and her baby, not exactly an everyday occurrence. Over the next hour, Debbie poured out the whole sordid tale. Her whirlwind romance with Mike, Rachel's disapproval, Sam's diagnosis, and the ultimatum that had led her to this dilapidated house in the middle of nowhere. When she finished, Oliver let out a low whistle. Damn, and here I thought my family was dysfunctional. Aunt Rachel always was a piece of work, but this is a new low. Debbie wiped away a stray tear. I just don't know what to do. I have no money, no job, and a baby who needs more care than I know how to give. Oliver was quiet for a long moment, drumming his fingers on the arm of his chair. Finally, he spoke. All right, here's the deal. You and the little guy can stay here as long as you need. I've got some connections in town. We'll figure out the medical stuff for Sam. And as for money? Well, let's just say Aunt Rachel's not the only one in the family with resources. Debbie's eyes widened in surprise. Why would you help us? You don't even know me. Oliver's lips quirked in a wry smile. Let's just say I've got my own bone to pick with dear Aunt Rachel. Besides, he added, his expression softening, that kid of yours deserves a fighting chance. And something tells me you're just the mama bear to give it to him. For the first time since Sam's birth, Debbie felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were going to be okay. 2 weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and worry-filled days. But true to his word, Oliver proved to be an unexpected godsend. He helped Debbie navigate the complex world of medical appointments and therapy sessions for Sam, using his connections to get them in to see the best specialists in the area. One afternoon, Oliver returned from a trip into town with a surprise visitor in tow, a distinguished-looking man in his 50s carrying a black medical bag. "Debbie," Oliver called out, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Carl Stevens. He's an old friend of mine, and he's here to take a look at Sam." Dr. Stevens turned out to be a leading pediatric specialist with experience in craniofacial disorders. As he examined Sam, his kind eyes and gentle touch put Debbie at ease for the first time since her son's birth. "Mrs. Wilson," Dr. Stevens said when he'd finished, "I won't lie to you. Samuel faces some challenges, but with the right care and support, there's no reason he can't lead a full, happy life." Tears of relief sprang to Debbie's eyes. "Really? You mean he'll be okay?" Dr. Stevens smiled warmly. "More than okay, I'd wager. Your son is a fighter, Mrs. Wilson, and with a mother as dedicated as you, I have no doubt he'll thrive." As Dr. Stevens outlined a treatment plan for Sam, Debbie felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. For the first time since that terrible day in the hospital, she allowed herself to imagine a future, a happy one for her and her son. Over the next few months, Debbie threw herself into Sam's care with renewed determination. Oliver remained a constant source of support, helping with everything from midnight feedings to driving them to doctor's appointments. As Sam grew stronger, so did the bond between Debbie and Oliver. What had started as an unlikely alliance slowly blossomed into friendship, and then, unexpectedly, into something more. It happened on a quiet evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Sam was asleep in his bassinet beside them, his tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. "You know," Oliver said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad Aunt Rachel sent you here." Debbie turned to him, surprised. "Even with all the chaos we've brought into your life?" Oliver's hand found hers, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. "Especially because of that. Deb, you and Sam, you've given me a reason to get my act together, to be better." As their eyes met, Debbie felt her heart skip a beat. Without thinking, she leaned in, her lips meeting Oliver's in a soft, hesitant kiss. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "Well," Oliver said, a hint of his old mischief in his eyes, "I guess that answers that question." From that moment on, their little makeshift family felt complete. Oliver doted on Sam as if he were his own, and Debbie found herself falling more in love with both of them every day. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. The rundown house on Sycamore Lane had been transformed, much like its inhabitants. Fresh paint, a thriving garden, and the sound of children's laughter had breathed new life into the once dilapidated property. On a sunny Saturday afternoon, Debbie chased after a giggling Sam in the local park. Despite the challenges he'd faced, Sam had grown into a happy, energetic little boy. His facial differences were still apparent, but they did nothing to dim the light in his eyes or the joy in his laughter. "I'm gonna get you!" Debbie called out, her own laughter bubbling up as Sam darted between the playground equipment. Suddenly, a pair of strong arms scooped Sam up from behind. "Gotcha, squirt!" Oliver's voice boomed as he tossed Sam into the air, catching him safely as the boy squealed with delight. Debbie's heart swelled as she watched them together. Oliver had legally adopted Sam the previous year, and the bond between father and son was unbreakable. "Ice cream!" Sam demanded, pointing towards the small cafe at the edge of the park. "What do you say, Mama Bear?" Oliver asked, wrapping an arm around Debbie's waist. "Should we indulge the little monster?" Debbie was about to agree when she froze, her eyes locked on two figures approaching from across the park. Even after 3 years, she would recognize them anywhere. Mike and Rachel Johnson strode towards them, looking like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. Rachel's eyes widened in shock as she took in the scene before her, while Mike's face drained of color. "Debbie?" Mike's voice was barely above a whisper. Is that Sam?" Debbie instinctively pulled Sam closer, while Oliver's arm tightened protectively around her waist. "Hello, Mike," Debbie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Yes, this is Sam, your son." Rachel's face contorted with fury. "How dare you show your face here, after everything you've done?" "That's enough, Aunt Rachel," Oliver cut in, his voice cold. "You don't get to speak to my wife that way." Mike's head snapped up at that. "Wife? Oliver? What the hell is going on here?" Oliver's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, cousin, it seems your mother's little plan backfired. She sent Debbie and Sam to me, thinking I was still the family drunk. But as it turns out, they were exactly what I needed to turn my life around." Rachel sputtered, her carefully crafted facade crumbling. "Oliver, you don't understand. This woman, she—" "Save it," Oliver snapped. "I know exactly what you did. How you lied to Mike, how you threatened Debbie. Well, guess what? Your perfect little plan failed. Debbie and Sam are my family now, and I'll be damned if I let you hurt them again." Mike looked between Debbie and Oliver, his expression a mixture of confusion and pain. "Debbie, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you. I should have been there." Debbie felt a pang of sympathy for the man she'd once loved, but it was overshadowed by the strength of her love for Oliver and the life they'd built together. "You're right, Mike. You should have been there. But you weren't. Oliver was. He's been here for every doctor's appointment, every milestone, every sleepless night. He's Sam's father in every way that matters." Sam, sensing the tension, tugged on Oliver's sleeve. "Daddy, can we go get ice cream now?" Oliver's face softened as he looked down at his son. "You bet, buddy. Come on, let's go." As they turned to leave, Debbie paused, looking back at Mike and Rachel. "I forgive you," she said softly. "Both of you. But Sam doesn't need your drama in his life. He's happy, he's healthy, and he's loved. That's all that matters." With that, Debbie took Oliver's hand, and the little family walked away, leaving a stunned Mike and Rachel in their wake. As they approached the ice cream stand, Oliver pulled Debbie close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You okay?" he murmured. Debbie nodded, watching as Sam debated between chocolate and strawberry flavors. "You know what? I really am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like everything is exactly as it should be." Oliver's answering smile was full of love and pride. "That's because it is, Mama Bear. It really is." As they sat on a park bench, enjoying their ice cream and each other's company, Debbie marveled at the twists and turns her life had taken. The path hadn't been easy, but it had led her exactly where she was meant to be, surrounded by love, strength, and the kind of happiness she'd once only dreamed of. Sam's laughter rang out, pure and joyful, as Oliver pretended to steal a bite of his ice cream. And in that moment, Debbie knew with absolute certainty that this beautiful, messy, perfect life was worth every struggle, every tear, and every moment of uncertainty. This was her happily ever after, and she wouldn't change a thing.
"All right, everyone's presentations are done," Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." "Absolutely right." His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, Yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, "I'm very sorry." Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, "Get his boss here immediately." It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. "What is that idiot doing?" "All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next." Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. "If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you." I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. "Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize." Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry." Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.